Join us on Patreon and become part of our journey to uncover history's untold stories. Your support helps us create in-depth content, bring hidden narratives to life, and keep history alive for everyone.
In the heart of Africa, where ancient highlands kiss the clouds and centuries-old churches are hewn from solid rock, lies a land whose spiritual legacy whispers of secrets far older than most civilizations dare remember. Ethiopia, enigmatic, enduring, and proud, is a place where the past is not buried in dust, but vibrantly alive in chants, scrolls, and sacred manuscripts. For thousands of years, it has preserved a scriptural tradition that may hold clues not only to the story of religion, but possibly to the very origins of humanity itself. Ethiopia's sacred texts have long been viewed through a narrow lens, often overshadowed by Greco-Roman religious histories or dismissed as regional anomalies in the Christian world. Yet when one begins to read between the lines of the ancient Ethiopian canon, most notably the Kebra Nagast, the Book of Enoch, the Jubilees, and the Guizi biblical manuscripts, what emerges is not just the tale of a people's faith, but perhaps the spiritual architecture of early mankind itself. These texts do not merely reflect a distant corner of Christianity. They embody a pre-colonial, pre-westernized cosmology where African antiquity stands not on the margins of sacred history, but at its radiant center. Ethiopia's claim to spiritual primacy begins with its unparalleled custodianship of the Book of Enoch, a mysterious and ancient scripture that was once widely circulated among Jewish sects before being excluded from the Hebrew Bible and largely erased from Western Christian traditions. Lost to Europe for over a millennium, the complete Book of Enoch was preserved only in the Guizi language of Ethiopia, meticulously copied by Ethiopian Orthodox monks. The book contains detailed accounts of the Watchers, fallen angels who taught mankind forbidden knowledge, descriptions of heaven and hell, visions of cosmic judgment, and an origin narrative that predates Genesis. It is no coincidence that Ethiopia is the only nation on earth where the full Book of Enoch survived intact. According to Ethiopian tradition, the wisdom of Enoch was too sacred to be lost, and his words, inscribed on ancient parchment, were kept hidden in monasteries nestled in the Simeon Mountains and Tigran highlands. These manuscripts were seen as divine treasures, too sacred for the general population but essential to the monastic orders who saw themselves as stewards of sacred time. Alongside the Book of Enoch is the Kebra Nagast, a 14th-century Guizi compilation of oral traditions, chronicles, and apocryphal tales that weaves together the Ethiopian Solomonic dynasty's origin with the biblical narrative. The text recounts how the Queen of Sheba, known as Makeda in Ethiopian lore, journeyed to meet King Solomon and returned to her land bearing his child, Menelik I. According to the Kebra Nagast, Menelik, upon reaching adulthood, returned to Jerusalem and took the Ark of the Covenant back to Ethiopia with divine blessing. From that point onward, Ethiopia would claim itself not merely as another Christian kingdom, but as Zion itself, God's chosen realm on earth. Far from being legend, this claim held immense theological weight in Ethiopian society, influencing not only politics and royal legitimacy, but also shaping the Ethiopian worldview regarding humanity's spiritual origins. If the Ark of the Covenant truly resides in Aksum, where many believe it is still hidden within the chapel of the tablet at the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion, then Ethiopia becomes more than a geographic territory. It becomes a spiritual axis around which biblical prophecy and ancestral memory revolve. Furthermore, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church's biblical canon is uniquely expansive, comprising over 80 books, including the Jubilees, 1 Enoch for Baruch, and Ascension of Isaiah, texts considered apocryphal or heretical by most of the Christian world. These books, often dated to early Second Temple Judaism or even before, present an alternate spiritual history, one in which humanity's relationship with the divine is mediated not solely through Western prophets, but through an African sacred context rooted in mountains, angels, and covenantal relics. Linguistically, too, the Guizi script preserves echoes of a Semitic past that is both African and Middle Eastern. Though now a liturgical language, Guizi bears striking resemblance to ancient Sabaean and Himyaritic scripts found in southern Arabia and the Horn of Africa, suggesting a once flourishing cultural and spiritual exchange across the Red Sea millennia before Europe's biblical traditions began to take form. This linguistic continuity anchors Ethiopia's sacred literature in an unbroken tradition that predates the rise of Rome and the codification of the Western Bible. More intriguing still is Ethiopia's geographical status as one of the oldest continuously inhabited places on Earth. The fossilized remains of Australopithecus afarensis, nicknamed Lucy, were unearthed in the Awash Valley of Ethiopia's Afar Depression, dating back over 3.2 million years. If modern humans indeed emerged from the Horn of Africa, as paleoanthropology and genetic science increasingly suggest, then Ethiopia is not only the cradle of civilization biologically, but potentially spiritually. Its texts, rituals, and oral traditions may not just be regional reflections of global religions. They may be the source material, the primordial theology of humankind. The preservation of these sacred texts is not simply a feat of religious devotion. It is a deliberate act of historical defiance. Ethiopia, unlike most of the African continent, was never formally colonized. This autonomy allowed its religious institutions to develop without the distortion of European missionary control, allowing for a purer retention of early Christian and pre-Christian doctrines. In the remote monasteries of Lake Tana and Debra Damo, monks have copied and illuminated ancient texts by hand for centuries, safeguarding a worldview that views the divine not as distant, but as immanent, woven into every stone, river, and breath of wind. Even now, researchers and theologians are beginning to recognize the profound significance of Ethiopia's ancient scriptures. Some argue that the Guizi manuscripts might hold early versions of biblical stories unfiltered by the political agendas of Roman councils. Others suggest that Ethiopia's religious cosmology, its emphasis on angels, heavenly books, and divine knowledge, is an authentic remnant of pre-exilic Jewish mysticism, now mostly lost in the rabbinic and Christian traditions. There's also a growing awareness that the Ethiopian concept of Kedusin, holiness, is deeply tied to the natural world and ancestral reverence, indicating that Ethiopia's sacred texts are not merely doctrinal, but cosmological blueprints that encode a deep relationship between humans, nature, and the divine. In an age where the planet faces spiritual and ecological crisis, these ancient African scriptures may yet offer wisdom capable of healing not just souls but civilizations. Could it be, then, that Ethiopia's sacred texts are more than relics of a forgotten theology? Could they be a missing chapter in humanity's story, a chapter that connects biology to belief, myth to memory, and Africa to the sacred origins of the human soul? As scholars continue to decode the manuscripts hidden in the mountains of Lalibela and the caves of Gajam, the answer becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. Perhaps, in the end, it is not merely Ethiopia's history that is at stake, but the world's understanding of its own beginnings. The key to humanity's origin may not be buried beneath the sands of Mesopotamia or sealed in the catacombs of Rome. It may lie instead in the illuminated scrolls of Aksum, the whispered prayers of Guizi-speaking monks, and the timeless voices of Africa's first and most enduring theologians.